This month, we have been wrestling with what it actually means to be a follower of Jesus. We've said throughout the series that many of us, if we grew up inside of a church or any kind of religious community, it feels like we did check all the boxes sometime in our life where we start coming to church, maybe we serve every now and again, maybe we raise our hand or pray a prayer, get baptized, we give some of our money to the work of the church. But we said that it still leaves us with this nagging sense of, okay, is this it? Is it just all about being in the Jesus Club and making sure that we believe the correct things to not fall out of the Jesus Club? And we said the very first week of the series, and hopefully it's been reinforced so far in the series, that no, Jesus never came to make people believe anything. He was actually inviting us to something more. Jesus isn't inviting us to simply believe in him. And let me say, not just believe in him like he exists or believe the right things about him. But no, he's inviting us to something more. It's to become his apprentice, to follow him. Check this out. Jesus followers actually follow the footsteps of Jesus. And like that ancient Jewish blessing says, may you be covered in the dust of your rabbi. May you spend time with him and be so close to him that his dust is all kicked up on you so you look like him and you see the world like he does. And this is the invitation of what you might have heard called discipleship. Discipleship is not just knowing the correct things. It's not about just knowing more about the Bible. No, it's about spending time with Jesus so that he apprentices you and then you look like him. And let me say this, that people that believe the correct things, they don't change the world. But people that follow Jesus and they start to act and practice life the way that Jesus did, man, those are the people that change the world. And so we're encouraging us in this series to get dusty, to be dusty, to stay dusty in the dust of our rabbi and our Lord Jesus. The very first week of this series, we talked about this invitation that Jesus gave his first century followers. Lek akarai, come and follow me. And Jesus asked people that were the rabbi rejects, people that didn't feel like they were good enough. They had too much of a bad rap sheet and not a good resume. But Jesus called them anyway. He's inviting you, no matter where you are on your journey, to follow him, to be with him, and to become like him. Last week, we talked about what it looks like to see the world through Jesus lenses, to see the world with a good eye instead of a bad eye, to see the world with a generous abundance mindset instead of a scarcity, cynical, skeptic mindset. And that's what led us to this sort of pop-up kingdom conspiracy with Cam last week, where we were able to raise over $2,800 because, there's a lot of questions about people that experience homelessness, but, we just want to reflexively give and be generous and help people that are suffering. And so today, we're going to take another angle on what it means to get dusty at the dust of our rabbi. We're going to talk about what it means to have dusty talk, to have dusty speech, to use our words in the way that Jesus spoke his words. And this is a hard topic for me, honestly, because if you've spent any amount of time with me, you know that I was born with a silver foot in my mouth. I recognize myself in Peter a lot from the scriptures because I'm a talk first and then I think about what I'm saying as the words are leaving my mouth. And sometimes I want to catch them and bring them back and it doesn't work. I could give probably 35 minutes of examples of how this is played out in my marriage, but I'll spare you about that. But I have discovered that the silver foot in your mouth, the speak first, think about it later, it's like the apple's not falling too far from the tree for my son, Jack, who's now 3 years old. He was a little speech delayed, but when he started talking, my wife and I say he just hasn't stopped talking since. So last night we were putting him to bed. And he had actually, he had tripped and fell down, and he actually tripped his mom as well. And he was, so embarrassed because he's like, I made a mistake. I'm so sorry I made a mistake. And so Megan and I are like, buddy, we all make mistakes. Mommy makes mistakes. Daddy makes mistakes. Well, that was a mistake for us to bring up because for the next 45 minutes, Jack was, going through all the mistakes he's seen Mommy and Daddy make. Remember, Mommy, when you felt you did that, or you dropped the food, or Daddy, when you said that? I'm like, no, we don't need to run through all of these, right? Oh, come on. And then just last Sunday, this is just an example of the pastor's kids story. So in our Bridgeway Kids environment that Jack is in, the preschool room, they're memorizing this beautiful psalm saying that I am fearfully and wonderfully made. And so there are motions and the teachers are saying it and the kids are supposed to speak it back to memorize this beautiful truth that we are fearfully and wonderfully made. So the kids are all saying, I am fearfully and wonderfully made, except for my son, who is yelling louder than anybody, not I am fearfully and wonderfully made. He is yelling, I am Darth Vader. I am Darth Vader. That's my boy. Just killing this parenting thing, but I'm sure his mouth, it's going to get him in a little bit of trouble as well. You know, words are so powerful. Words are interesting to me. Do you know that on average, human beings spend 20% of our time awake speaking? Like 20%, 1/5 of every minute that we are awake, we are talking. And if at the end of 1 year, somebody was recording every word that we say, and I'm sure like my smartphone is doing that as I speak because that's creepy. But if we record every word that we say for an entire year, it would fill up 66 800-page books. That's what you speak in a year, 66 800-page books. That's a lot of time that we spend talking at the same time that we feel like we're always just listening to somebody else. You know, scientifically, it's a really interesting thing because neuroscientists are starting to realize the effects that words that we receive and words that we say, what they have on the neural pathways inside of our brains. And there's this neuroscientist by the name of Andrew Newberg, and he's at Thomas Jefferson University, and this is what he said about the power of our words. He said, a single word has the power to influence the expression of genes that regulate physical and emotional stress. You hearing, receiving, speaking a singular word can actually change your genetic makeup and can make you more physically stressed or emotionally stressed. And we all know this because we hear the words taxes and IRS and ooh, we feel it. And the opposite, we hear it when we hear the word pizza, things are awesome, right? There's no stress at all. But it actually, the words that we receive and speak, it affects us down to a neurological level and connects synapses and neural pathways. Our words are so powerful. We know this just from movies and pop culture that we take in, right? There are just certain quotes from movies that just move us, leave us with like goosebumps, or any other softies in the room every now and again have just like a single tear drop down their face. Like during a movie, like these words that we hear, they do this to us. And for me, like every example I could think of this morning was all movies in the 90s, which is now like 30 some years ago. I'm getting old, but this is when they did tear-jerking good movies here. But you had like Jack Nicholson in As Good as It Gets with Helen Hunt. Remember, it was like, you make me want to be a better man. And that's a good impression, if I may say so myself, right? You know, you had that example. You had Tom Cruise and Jerry Maguire talking to Renee Zellweger saying, you complete me, which is terrible theology, but it was a powerful line at the time, right? That's a message for another time. Or like, you know, you hear these things like in Independence Day, which is like the greatest blockbuster, dumb sci-fi action movie ever, so quotable. You have like the president that I would vote for every term, President Whitmore, who has this speech before the big battle at the end. He gets on the microphone and he says like this beautiful thing. He says, we will not go quietly into the night. We will not vanish without a fight. This is our Independence Day. And I still get goosebumps seeing the scene. The music swells and like, it's a powerful thing. And apparently I'm the only one that remembers this. But Whitmore 2024 is what I'm saying. There's quotes from actual history that have like moved the course of culture and all of events. You have, you know, FDR, President Roosevelt saying the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. And that just moved the course and the culture of our nation. You have Mr. Gorbachev tear down this wall that ended or began to end the Cold War from President Reagan. I mean, those are big, powerful moments. And there's also like smaller, powerful moments, like when you go through the drive-thru at McDonald's and the person on the other side says that the ice cream machine is working. This is a day in all of history, right? It's a powerful thing. Words, you guys, I mean, they have the ability to lift us up and make us feel like we're floating. Has anybody ever said something to you that just like, it made you feel lighter, it made you feel like you mattered, like you belong? Somebody said that I'm so proud of you, or I can see how hard you have worked. I see greatness in you, or they catch you doing something and they're like, you are really, really good at that. They can lift you up and speak life into you. But it's also true, and we've all experienced this, words spoken to us, man, they can tear you down. There are phrases that I imagine were spoken to you 30, 40 years ago that you can still remember the way that it made you feel. You can remember what it was like to be on the other side of that phrase, and it was like you're being stabbed. And as you're thinking about it right now, you're like, Joel, stop talking about it because you're twisting the knife, right? When I was in my 8th grade year in middle school, I was in my very first band. And we weren't even good enough to be a garage band. We were a basement band playing in my parents' basement. And it was a weird configuration because we would play like church music songs, but we'd also play like Give Me 3 Steps by Leonard Skinner because it was fun. And we just threw it all in the same set. It was an interesting time. But I'll never forget we were playing a big gig. And for us, a big gig was like 30 people showing up to hear us play. And it was outside in the middle of July. And I'm just an 8th grader. And I'm like, okay, I'm just going to wear like, shorts and like a t-shirt because I don't want to get like really disgusting. It's going to be so hot and we're going to be out in the sun. And the lead guitar player in this band was actually a senior in high school. And he was like the alpha in the group, so talented, leading the way. And I'll never forget, we're getting ready to start the first song. And he turns around to me, and I'm playing bass. And he turns around and he goes, "Real rock stars don't wear shorts." And he just turned around and started, "Lord, I lift your name on high," or something like that. But man, I still remember that. And I don't think I've ever worn shorts on a stage since. Because it affected me. It was this like thing that I can still remember the way it made me feel. And I still think about it, whether it be consciously or subconsciously, all the time. And it was so silly. And I was like 13 years old. Words, they can tear us down. Somebody saying you're stupid or you're wrong for this or you're unattractive, you're overweight. All these different things that we hear, man, it can be on loop. I love there's this Jewish rabbi, this Orthodox Jewish rabbi, Abraham Joshua Heschel. He says this. He said, words create worlds. The words that we hear, they create a world that we find ourselves living in, a world where we feel accepted, loved, that we belong, and that there's a future for us, or a world that says that we're not good enough, that we don't have what it takes, that we'll never amount to anything. And I think the challenge for us as we think about the power of the words that we speak is this: what world are our words creating for others? Is it a world that we want to live in, that we want our kids to live in? What world are we creating with our words? You see, the words that we speak are not just like this social construct. According to Jesus, they're a deeply spiritual reality. It's not just this throwaway topic where it doesn't really matter what you say. It's just all about what you believe or what you think or what's going on inside of you. Jesus sort of like cuts that thinking down. He says that they're deeply spiritual and they're deeply revealing about what's actually going on under the hood. In the Sermon on the Mount that we've talked a lot about in this series, where Jesus is sort of giving his kingdom manifesto, what it looks like to be a part of his movement and his family, the kingdom of God, Jesus says this about actions and words. He says, "No good tree bears bad fruit, nor does a bad tree bear good fruit. Each tree is recognized by its own fruit. People do not pick figs from thorn bushes or grapes from briars. A good man brings good things out of the good stored up in his heart, and an evil man brings evil things out of the evil stored up in his heart." And he summarizes by saying this: "For the mouth speaks what the heart is full of." He says, if you want to see what somebody is about, you see the fruit that they produce, what comes from their life. And if somebody is walking with God, then they're going to have like this good fruit come, but you're not going to have evil fruit come from those walking with God, and you're not going to have good fruit coming from those who want to have nothing to do with the things of God. He says ultimately that your heart or your words reveal the status and the state of your heart. I mean, think of it this way. Jesus says that our words are so revealing because they show what's going on underneath the hood. Critical words reveal a critical heart. Judgmental words reveal a self-righteous heart. Judgmental words reveal a self-righteous heart. Negative words reveal a fearful heart. And harsh words reveal a bitter, bitter heart. So the words that we speak, you guys, they are deeply spiritual, and they deeply matter to our rabbi, our Lord Jesus, because Jesus is all about getting underneath the hood. It's not just all about our outward actions. He wants our heart to be right. He wants our heart to be aligned with him and his kingdom agenda. What's interesting about words when we talk about it in church is I grew up in church, and I grew up in youth group in an evangelical church, and whenever we talked about words, it was all just about the bad words. It was the only thing we ever said about words were don't say the bad 4-letter words. And there's that list that I'm just going to repeat right now in front of all of you and get fired. Just kidding. But like, it was always about cuss words, those words you can't say around your grandma and you would like say in front of your friends and snicker. Like, that was the only thing we ever talked about, words. And what's interesting in the Bible, like the whole scope of the scriptures, there's not like ever a thou shalt not say blank, 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 the George Carlin bit. It's never that kind of thing going on because there's been so many different cultures and different kingdoms and different languages that come. Those words always change. But what's talked about over and over again is making sure that the words that we speak, that they bring people life and they don't tear people down. They bring them life, not death, and they build them up and don't tear them down. Paul, writing to the church in Ephesus, it's in our New Testament in Ephesians, he says, do not let unwholesome talk come from your mouth in Ephesians chapter 4. What's interesting about that phrase, unwholesome, it's not like going back to hear the bad words that you're not allowed to say in front of your grandma, right? It's not those words at all. It's actually the Greek word sapros. Can you guys say sapros with me? 1, 2, 3. Sapros. And sapros, for unwholesome talk, sapros meant something that was putrid. Something that was just poison, some produce that was rotten. That if somebody else ingested or ate something that was sapros, it would poison them. It would make them sick. It would break them down. You see, when the scriptures talk about our words, it's never an arbitrary list of words that God is too holy to hear, but it's about the way that our words make other people feel. Do these words bring honor or dishonor? Do they help them, build them up and make them feel strong and healthy, or does it poison them because it's putrid, it's unwholesome, it's rotten? That's the question that we should ask in using our words. And there's a couple different ways that this unwholesome talk is talked about inside of the New Testament. The first way it's talked about is in the idea of slander. It's slander, and this is the Hebrew phrase that Jesus would have spoken, motzei shem ra, and it's the slander. Motzei shem ra was lying about people, spreading lies about people to tear them down. If somebody is applying for a job in your organization and you want that job, and if your supervisor asks you about that job and them as a person, you make something up, you lie about them, or you spread a rumor about them that tears them down. You know, Jesus, he used this Hebrew idiom, motzei shem ra, as this idea in some of his teaching. He's sending his disciples, his followers out to go do his work. And he says that some people might actually slander you because you're following me. Jesus said this, blessed are you when people hate you, when they exclude you and insult you and reject your name as evil. And that's the phrase, the idiom, the figure of speech for slander. When people do this because of the Son of Man, Jesus is saying people might make things up about you, and they might want to tear you down because you're committed to me. This is the kind of language, you guys, the kind of words that followers of Jesus, dusty people, we don't play that game. We don't slander. We don't make somebody's name, tear that down, because our rabbi says that that's not what we are called to do. This idea of slander, or lying about somebody, spreading lies about somebody, doesn't like our technological moment with social media and the internet, isn't it like it's just ready for like kerosene to make a big mess of things? You know, you might actually want to share something that you think would be like a snarky thing on social media, and you push the share button on Twitter or on Facebook, that really supports your political view of something, but you don't verify, you don't check the facts behind the quote, and you're slandering somebody's name and you're slandering somebody else's worldview. Another way that motzei shem ra might play out in our time today is us starting a sentence, well, I heard that they, I heard. Even though we didn't hear firsthand at all and it's not our story to share and we know it might tear somebody down, we still might do that. Motzei shem ra, the slander, is a way that our words can be putrid and unwholesome and hurt other people when they hear it. It's the power of our words, but we need to be people. Let us be people that don't slander others and spread lies about others. Another Hebrew, a figure of speech around the power of words is the idea, it sounds so intense, but it's actually an evil tongue. an evil tongue. This is lashon hara. This is people spreading gossip, spreading rumors, or bringing up a humiliating thing in front of a bunch of people to specifically embarrass somebody else. This is lashon hara, to have an evil tongue. And Jesus, his half-brother James, in his New Testament letter, he actually talks about the power of the tongue, and he talks about an evil tongue often. He actually says this in chapter 3. He says, the tongue is a small part of the body, but it makes great boasts. Consider the great forest, what a great forest is set on fire by a small spark. The tongue is also a fire, a world of evil. That's where we get the phrase lashon hara, an evil tongue. Among the parts of the body, it corrupts the whole body, sets the whole course of one's life on fire. And tell us how you really feel, James. And it is itself set on fire by hell. Is James making his point clear? That when we have an evil tongue, when we're out to just tear somebody down by spreading a rumor, spreading lies, by gossiping about other people, telling somebody else's story even though we have no business to tell it, oh man, we are going to do damage. We're going to burn the whole forest down. In the Jewish mind, lashon hara was tied closely to having leprosy. The words actually, they look similar in the original language. So the idea of leprosy and having an evil tongue were always tied together. And I think it was because when you had leprosy in the ancient world, you were separated from people. You had a barricade, a quarantine between you and other people. And I think that having an evil tongue, spreading gossip and rumors, it separates you from other people as well. So what does having an evil tongue that's set on fire by hell itself, what does it look like today for us possibly? It might look like a group text message with a few people, but not that one person that you're talking about. Because you talk about that person, you guys picking up what I'm putting down? It might be your boss. I'm looking at the people that I work with here. No. Maybe for you, having an evil tongue means keep bringing up an embarrassing moment or an embarrassing thing about somebody just to score a cheap laugh. Maybe it's gossiping about someone else's fall or misfortune. Maybe for you in the business world, if you're a business leader, a competitor has a fall and you like to talk about it because it makes you feel good. But that's gossiping, that's having an evil tongue. Some of the key phrases to look for if we're practicing this evil tongue talk is, well, but I'm not lying. But it is true. Or maybe like this, I don't mean this ugly, but it's true, right? Here's a phrase that I'm trying to internalize in my life when it comes to this. If it's not your story to tell, don't tell that story. If it's not your story to tell, don't tell that story. It'd be so beautiful for people that are following Jesus to not be caught up in this evil tongue way that pushes people away, that gets this cheap thrill from gossip and the failures of other people, but to use our words to spread light and life among other people. So those are some of the negative ways that speech is used in the world of Jesus. But let's move more towards what it really looks like to be covered in the dust of our rabbi and our Lord Jesus. And I had so much fun this week just on my document as I'm writing my talk. I just wrote this down. How did Jesus was his words? Because if we're going to be people that spend time with Jesus so that we can become like Jesus, it's good for us to know how Jesus used his words. What was the mission behind the words that Jesus used? And I'll tell you this, to start, it wasn't all just nice, fluffy, Hallmark Christianity. Jesus used harsh words. Jesus used words that cut sometimes, but it was always to cut, to point out a group of people that were being hurt. It was always to cut, to prove a point that people that were in the religious elite, the people that were the gatekeepers, were missing the point of what they were doing. So one of the places and the ways that Jesus used his words was to speak to an injustice and to speak for the people that were excluded from what God was doing. In Matthew chapter 23, this is one of the passages that honestly, it keeps me up at night sometimes. But this is what Jesus says in Matthew 23. He says, "Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites. You shut the door of the kingdom of heaven in people's faces. You yourselves do not enter, nor will you let those enter who are trying to. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites. You travel over land and sea to win one single convert. And when you have succeeded, you make them twice as much a child of hell as you." Like, this is like Jesus turning into like an insult comic, right? This is him at a roast where he's calling out the religious leaders, the Pharisees, the rule keepers, the gatekeepers of the day. And I'll tell you why this is like something that keeps me up at night. It's because this is not just about a group of Jewish people. This is about a mindset that comes in religious circles where people feel like the leaders are the gatekeepers of the ones that are allowed in and the ones that are included in what God is doing. And that's me in my role. That's us as followers of Jesus as well. And so what we need to be mindful of is like, are we people that are gleefully keeping people out? Or are we swinging the doors wide open to those that our culture might say, you don't belong here because of your past, your pedigree, what your social media looks like, your relationships, your work, where you live in Kokomo? What is the danger there? But Jesus used his words to call out injustice and oppression and to make sure that people were not being excluded, but that the doors of the kingdom of God were wide open, not shut in people's faces. That's one of the ways that Jesus used his words. Another way that Jesus used his words was to speak up for the vulnerable in his culture. And he did this in multiple ways. One way he did this was for children. And children in the first century, it's hard for us to understand, but children were such an afterthought to the ancient world. It was completely legal for you to have a child and then wait a week and decide if you don't want this child after a week, you could just take them over to the town trash dump for them to die from what was called exposure, just to leave them outside. This was the world that Jesus was born into. And Jesus used his words to speak to the evil that was infanticide, the evil that was letting children die from exposure. And he did it in a powerful and provocative way. He says in Matthew 18, Jesus called a little child to him and placed the child among them. And he said, truly, I tell you, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. In other words, these kids have got something that you adults don't have. You're missing out on. Therefore, whoever takes the lowly position of this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me. He's elevating children in a culture that was saying that they're not worth it. They're just something, another mouth to feed, more trouble. And then what I love next is that Jesus, speaking again to religious leaders that are blocking out children and to a culture that wasn't taking care of kids, Jesus says it's the very next verse. If anyone causes one of these little ones, those who believe in me, to stumble, he turns into like Tony Soprano mob boss Jesus. It would be better for them to have a large millstone hung around their neck and be drowned in the depths of the sea. Put that on HBO, right? That's intense. But Jesus is using this language to really intensify his passion for a group of people in his culture that were left to the wayside and that were told that they didn't matter. He used his words to protect and empower children. He used his words to protect and empower women. And there's so many examples of this, how Jesus did this towards women who were not considered even second-class citizens in the ancient world. One of the ways that he did this was in his teaching about divorce. Now, it was common in legal practice in the first century Jewish world, if a man wanted to divorce his wife, he needed to just present a certificate of divorce and then move on with his life. But Jesus took what many would say was a much more conservative view of divorce. He says you can't just hand a certificate of divorce. I mean, there are just a few exceptions for why you should ever divorce a woman. And some people in our modern eyes, we might see that and hear that in a way that was like, oh, Jesus, why are you saying this? Why are you making it so difficult for a woman to get divorced? But Jesus wasn't doing that. Most theologians would say that Jesus was more strict on his regard of how you could be divorced because it actually would protect a woman. A woman couldn't have any savings. They couldn't learn how to write. They could barely ever work outside of the home. They couldn't own land at all. And so women were being thrown to the wayside through divorce all the time. And Jesus said, no. I'm going to show you that marriage is a very sacred thing so that women were protected in the way that they were handled in the ancient world. Because Jesus saw them and he protected them over and over and over again. Jesus, he used his words often to spring hope into a place of condemnation. John chapter 8, we're told this powerful story of how there's this woman who's caught in the act of adultery and thrown right in front of Jesus, and there are a bunch of religious leaders who have stones in their hand to condemn her because they're quoting and weaponizing a Bible verse to say that this is what we should do, right, Jesus, right, Rabbi? And Jesus creatively goes down into the dirt and starts writing something into the dirt. And something about that moment made these religious leaders who had stones in their hand, one by one, drop their stone and walk away. And then it was just the woman who had been caught in the act of adultery and the rabbi, Jesus. And Jesus looks her in the eyes and speaks these words, "Who is here to condemn you?" She said, "No one." And then Jesus says, "Neither do I condemn you. Now go and live a life free from sin." Jesus didn't join the crowd of condemnation, but he spoke hope into this woman's life. And let's not forget some of the last words that Jesus ever spoke while he was hanging on a cross. He looked out at the people that had put him there. He looked out at Roman officials. He looked out at Jewish officials and priests that were corrupt. And he looked at them, and some of his last words were, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." It was forgiveness in the face of injustice, even towards him. This is how Jesus used his words over and over and over again. So my friends, we get dusty when we use our words in the same way that Jesus used his words. Not to have an evil tongue, not to be someone who slanders or just stays away from the bad cuss words, but to actively use our words to bring the up there down here, to be on mission with God's mission of making earth look more like heaven. So I want to give you just a couple ways that we can get dusty in our talk this next week. First is this: to speak words of life. Proverbs says that the power of the tongue is to bring words of life and death. And we all have experienced words of death that break us down, that kill something inside of us. The call of a Jesus follower is to speak words of life, to encourage people, to check on people, to compliment people, to hear me. In a time where it's so in vogue to catch people doing something wrong and shame them for it, what would it look like if we were people that spoke words of life and caught people doing stuff right and say, "Hey, I saw you do that. That was awesome." You never know the impact that your words of life can spring up in somebody who is struggling. I remember it was a little over 3 years ago, and I was in a transition in my life, and I didn't know what I was doing next for my work and for my ministry. And there was somebody here who's still part of Bridgeway who called me. And I was maybe having one of the darkest nights of the soul possible, because my confidence was at an all-time low. I didn't know if I was going to move my family. I didn't know if I was just going to go get a job in the marketplace. I didn't know what was next for me. And this woman called me, and she just spoke words of life into me. She told me, "Oh, you need to lead a church. You need to preach and teach and shepherd and lead people. You can do this." She said, "Joel, you are created to do this." And I felt like I was floating at the end of the conversation. It gave me confidence that I didn't think was possible. And it wasn't just confidence in me, but it was confidence in the way that God had wired me and created me. And you never know the impact of words that you speak to lift somebody up from the grave of despair to life. So let's be people that speak words of life. And let's double down on it here. I put it this way: speak words of life often. Let's be people that share words of life liberally, overflowing from our cup. Let's be people that if we don't have anything nice to say, instead of just being quiet, let's do the homework to think of something kind to say that will bring somebody up from being down. If you're a parent, and especially dads, let me just speak to dads just for a moment. If you're a parent or a grandfather, let's put rhythms in our lives to where we are speaking love and life into our children. Not just attached to their accomplishments, but attached to their failures, attached to their insecurities, attached to their fears. Let's be people, let's be men that say, "I love you. liberally and often and looking them in the eyes. Let's be people like that have rhythms of our life, that we just share our love to our children, to our spouses, to your supervisors. That's weird, supervisors, that's weird. But let's be people that are just saying I love you and meaning it to people often. Speak words of life, not just once or twice, but often. Pray for someone twice as much as they criticize you. It's really easy to criticize someone. It's really easy to see what somebody is doing wrong. But what would it look like for us to pray for people, to speak hope and life into people that drive us nuts? Martin Luther said this once, that the best way to turn an enemy into a friend is to pray for them daily and pray for God's good in their life. What if that would change our mindset, change the way that we see them? But let's be people that speak words of life often, overflowing in our lives. And one last way that we can get dusty in our talk, and we saw this so much from Jesus, is to use our words to speak up for those who are pushed down. May we at Bridgeway Church, you guys, may we be people that when we see people, that culture, that maybe some religious institutions, news, or different political spins, people that they push out, may we be people that lift them up and open the door for them. In the same way that Jesus did that for women, for the same way that Jesus did that for children, the same way Jesus did that for the irreligious of his day. May we be people that when we see people that are pushed down, we speak for them. We stand in the gap for them. We take the bullet for them because that's what our rabbi would do. May we speak up for those who are culture, push down and push away. I love what Proverbs 31 says about this. It says, speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, for the rights of all who are destitute. Speak up and judge fairly. Defend the rights of the poor and needy. I am just so taken aback by that last phrase. Defend the rights of the poor and the needy. There's a cultural moment right now in our country where there are a lot of voices shouting at all of us to hold on to our rights, to fight for our rights, to white knuckle our rights. And I understand the fear, and I understand the changing landscape that might lead us to that kind of fear. But let me say this, that followers of Jesus always look more like Jesus when we are defending the rights of other people more than we're white-knuckling our rights. We look all dusty when we're in the trenches defending the rights and the humanity of other people. But when we're just all about holding on to what we want and the way that we always had it, I don't think that looks much like the God who's revealed in Jesus, who gave his life away on a cross for you and for me. So may we be people that we step out, we take the hit, and we speak up for those who are being pushed down or pushed out. And if you're thinking about a group of people right now, and you're like, but what about them? Yeah, probably them, for you. Because Jesus was always using his words to lift up and to point the light on the folly of pushing people out. This is the Jesus who invited a tax collector to come follow him, that invited a zealot to come follow him, that invited people that were rabbi rejects to come follow him. Man, may we be people that use our words to include and not exclude. So if your year, 2022, fills 66 800-page books of words, what story does your book share? It's a lot of ink, a lot of text. What story does your words tell? What story do your words share? Is it a story of life? Is this a story of love? Or is it a story pushing people out, pushing people down? That's the challenge, but that's the invitation. Let's get all dusty with the way that we talk. Let's talk and think creatively the way that our rabbi and our Lord Jesus did. And let's just see the beautiful stories that our books will tell because of it. Let's try it. It's not popular. It's upside down and opposite, but man, that's what Jesus' kingdom is all about.